Have you ever done something intentionally just to mess with people's minds? I had to do that sometime in college. I was in a particular class, it was a communications class, and our professor had us discussing social norms. Now, social norms are basically these little unwritten rules that we all follow to live in a civil society so that we all get along and we don't annoy each other. And so he had us discussing what those social norms were. So first off, what we did was we listed this giant list of social norms, every single thing we could think of that could be considered a social norm. Then we started discussing, okay, why did this exist? Where did it come from? Was it a good thing that it existed or not? And it was all pretty normal and it was all pretty casual conversation until he got to the assignment part. So for the assignment, he said, look at this list that we generated of social norms. What I want you to do now is I want you to go out and I want to take as many of these as you can and violate them. Break them and see what happens. So with this mandate, the whole class goes out and is ready to terrorize our unsuspecting fellow students. So, what type of things did he have in mind for us to do? Well, things like going up to somebody's cafe table and sitting down right at their table. Or walking up to a group of strangers that you don't know who are talking and just standing there inside their conversation circle and say nothing. Or how about grabbing food off of somebody else's plate? Or my personal favorite, walk into an elevator that's crowded with people and don't turn around to look at the numbers. Just stand there facing the back of the elevator while everyone else stares at you. Let me tell you, that messes with people's minds. They have no idea what to do with that. See, as it turns out, when you start acting in a way that's counter to the norm of what people are expecting, we get resistance. So that's what we want to talk a little bit about with you this morning. We want to talk about resistance. The resistance that we encounter when we try to love generously. So we've been in this series called Loving Generously. And if you haven't seen any of the previous ones, I encourage you to go to our website and check them out. But basically what we've been talking about is this concept of loving generously, to expand our relational sphere. How can we expand the amount of people who we care about, who we're in relationships with? Maybe it's people of a different background or a different culture or people of a different socioeconomic class. Somebody you might not ordinarily encounter. How can we be more relationally generous? And how can we learn to love people and serve people more? How can we extend our tables? And we are challenged to expand our love. Now here's what we know. We know that when we try to make changes in our own lives, we meet with resistance. And I think we've all experienced this in some form or another at some point. Take for example, have you ever tried to start working out? You get a gym membership, you walk in, you feel good, you get on some of the machines and you start lifting, and it's like, oh, this feels great. I'm glad I'm doing this. The endorphins start pumping, you feel excellent, you're like, this is what I'm going to do. Until the next morning, when you can't lift your arms above here and you go walking around like a penguin everywhere. Or maybe it's eating healthier. This year, I'm definitely going to eat healthier. So you come up with a plan. You get rid of all of your junk food. You even buy kale, even though kale tastes like wet sadness. And you come in, and then all your coworkers brought in donuts that morning. That's resistance. Or maybe it's one of those things where you decided, you know what, I'm going to stop saying so much negative things about people. I'm going to stop making negative comments. And you're really determined to do it. And then 3 people cut you off on your way to work. And you're like, well, I guess we'll start that tomorrow. Or how about patience? You know, I would love to be more patient with my kids. I really want to take my time and just be more patient with them. And then you come home and your kid has dumped a bag of flour out all over the floor, and now there's little flour footprints all over the house. That's actually a true story. I did that to my parents when I was a kid. Or maybe it's money. I really want to be better with money, but there's so many sales and so many ads coming in every single day. We meet with resistance. So today we're talking about the resistance that specifically comes from trying to love generously. Now, as part of this series, we've been checking in with this family, the Donovans. And we've been watching this video series about how the Donovans are trying to figure out this idea of loving generously. And what we'll see is that as they go deeper into loving generously, they're going to encounter more and more resistance. Let's take a look.
Places, people, places. T-minus 24 hours. This wedding may be hasty, but it's not going to be sloppy. Ray, you're going to stand right over here.
Sounds so beautiful.
Excuse me. Frank, Cassie, can I have a word, please? We tried knocking.
Sorry about that. Getting ready for this wedding has been crazy. We're all running around. So, what can we do for you?
Wedding?
Yeah, for some friends of ours. They were at the banquet a few weeks ago. I think it was the one that you left early from.
Frank, let me cut to the chase. We've received a number of complaints at the Homeowners Association about the yard sale last week.
Complaints? From whom?
That's not important. What is important is that we have a responsibility to ensure a reasonable expectation of security in our community. We live in a gated community. It's gated for a reason.
I'm sorry, but was there something unsafe about a yard sale?
The financial investment that you guys have made down at the soup kitchen is wonderful. And we're all for helping those folks down there find work.
We just don't know if it was a good idea to hire them to work at your yard sale. I mean, did you do any background checks?
They're not our employees, Mark. They're our friends.
We're just all concerned for you, that's all. Listen, were you and Eddie arrested last week for solicitation?
So are my parents in some kind of trouble with the neighborhood?
I don't know. I know there was kind of a big stink about those people at the yard sale.
What people?
The homeless people.
They're not homeless. They're really nice, actually.
Well, whoever they are. My parents were all, "The Donovans are acting weird lately. We don't want you going over there without asking us."
That's stupid.
Is it?
I mean, doesn't it freak you out just a little? You've got this girl living with you who people are saying used to be a professional. And you've got all these homeless people or whatever coming to your house. It's kind of weird.
For now, this is just an informal warning. But if you insist on continuing to put our community at risk, we'll be forced to consider probationary status.
Probationary status? Mark and Marianne, you're on board with this? We've been friends since our kids were in diapers.
Frank, none of us expects it to come to that. We just want things the way they were. And then everything will be fine.
And by the way, an event of this size has to be approved by the HOA at least a month in advance. We have to confer over things like security, parking, street access.
You come to our Christmas party every year. We host 5 times as many people as will be at this wedding. And you've never once told us that we need to discuss this with the HOA.
I'm sure you won't have trouble finding some place to move it. Otherwise, we're gonna have to call the police.
Thomas, is something wrong? Oh, look at you. Breathtaking.
Thank you.
Thomas, she looks so beautiful.
Can you describe her for me?
Thomas, it is bad luck for the groom to see the bride in her gown before the wedding.
Is everything okay?
Yeah. It should... Could you give us a second, Dolores?
Okay. What's wrong? I thought it was gonna look beautiful on you.
I found this caterer to a friend of ours.
Excuse me. Can I have everyone's attention? I never knew you could grow so close to people so quickly. We want to thank you all. We are so extremely grateful for everyone around this table, and I can think of nothing better than to share our wedding with you. But we've decided we should postpone the wedding.
What?
Postpone?
Why?
What's going on?
Cassie and Frank, Megan and Evan, you have all invited us into your homes and into your lives, and we can't ask you to sacrifice your friendships as well.
Thomas overheard your conversation with the Homeowners Association. We think it's wonderful that you still want to do this for us anyway, but we can't ask you to do that. It's not fair to you. We can wait a little while anyway.
We've enjoyed a pretty good standing in this community for as long as we've been here. And we're thankful for that. But not at the expense of living the way that God has called us to live. When he says that the world will hate us because he has chosen us out of the world, I really don't get that. And I don't want to be hated by anyone, especially friends like Mark, Marianne, and Allison. But if they hate us because we share our lives with you clowns, well, I'm all right with that.
We got you a gift. Oh, you did not need to get us anything.
We didn't. Exactly.
What is it?
It's a 12A.
A 12 what?
It's for the door of the guest house. When we offered you that space, we thought you'd be with us longer. And although we're happy that you have a good reason for moving out, we'll miss you. So as a family, we decided to keep that space available for anyone that might need it in the future. And in your memory, we have decided to christen it Unit 1-2A.
One to another. Be devoted one to another in love. Outdo one another in showing honor. We thought that we'd make it sort of our unofficial motto.
It's perfect.
How about a toast then? To Thomas and Julia, and to outdoing one another in showing honor.
Cheers.
Cheers.
So as we see, the Donovans are trying more and more to love generously to the people in their lives. And they're going out of their way to try and make it special for them. But the more they do, the more resistance they keep encountering. The truth is, loving generously runs counter to the way that most of the world operates. And what happens when we begin to live and we begin to love counter to the way the world operates? We meet with resistance. And we see this in the life of Jesus too. See, Jesus was always doing things that ran afoul of the culture in an effort to love generously to other people. There's all kinds of stories in the Bible where we encounter this. So we're going to look at one of those particular stories this morning. So we're going to find this one in Matthew chapter 12, and we're going to be reading from verses 9 to 14. So it says this: "Going on from that place, he," meaning Jesus, "went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, 'Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?' Now he said to them, 'If any of you has a sheep, and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, would you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath.' Then he said to the man, 'Stretch out your hand.' So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus." Now this is a fascinating story. And what we see from the start of this story is that something is going on. See, Jesus had a reputation for loving generously, and everybody knew it. And you would think that's a good thing, but there was a group of people in this story who were actually looking for an opportunity to use that ability of Jesus to love generously against him. They actually wanted to use it against him to attack him and to hurt him. So they set a trap for him in the temple with this man with the shriveled hand. See, they knew what Jesus was going to do. They knew if they put this situation up that Jesus was going to take the bait. See, this is strange to us because to us, we would think healing somebody's arm is an objectively good thing. Who could have a problem with healing someone's arm? That seems like an objectively good thing. The problem is that it violated their natural order. It violated their culture, their code. See, in the Jewish culture at this time, they had such a thing as Sabbath laws. And the idea was that you were not supposed to work on the Sabbath to honor the Sabbath. Now, what was work, you might ask? Well, it was pretty much every single thing a person could do was almost classified as work. They had so many rules and regulations about what was work and what wasn't. And to them, healing somebody constituted work. So they wanted to set up a trap to see if Jesus would fall into it. You see, Jesus wasn't dumb. He knew what was going on the whole time. And he healed the guy anyway. Jesus walked right into that situation, knowing the resistance he was facing and knowing the trap, and he healed anyway. See, Jesus chose to love generously despite the consequences. See, there are always consequences when we love counter to the way the world views people. There's always going to be consequences. And the more we decide to follow Jesus and love generously, the more we're going to encounter that resistance. And you know, because you and I are not Jesus, that resistance, first and foremost, often starts from within us. Usually that resistance starts with ourselves. And I can give you a specific story about that. It's a story from my own life. One of the things we used to do when I was a youth pastor was we would take kids up to Brooklyn to serve. Sometimes we would serve in soup kitchens, sometimes in local parks, sometimes with other organizations where we could help out in some manner. And the one day, my group was assigned to go to a facility for mentally disabled adults. It was basically a facility where they could show up and play games and hang out. And our job was to go there and interact with the residents and those who had shown up for that day. And I gotta tell you, it made me uncomfortable just thinking about it. I wish it didn't, but it made me really uncomfortable. And I started to feel that resistance inside of me. I don't want to do this. I don't know that I want to go there. And I could feel it. And I didn't like that I felt it, but it was there. This was going to be way out of my comfort zone. But fortunately, since I was in charge, I didn't have a choice of backing out. And I went. And it was a real stretching experience, and it was a great experience, and I enjoyed it. But this is the problem for us. When we start moving towards loving generously, we start moving out of our comfort zones, and then we start feeling that resistance within inside of us. Maybe you experience it when it comes to welcoming new people at church. You see somebody sitting near you, and you don't know who they are, who recognize them, and you think to yourself, I should go over and say hi. But then that resistance starts coming up. And we say to ourselves, well, I'm not great with conversation. I don't really know what to say. Or maybe it's as simple as, well, hopefully somebody else will do it and then I don't have to. Or maybe there's an opportunity where we can step into a situation financially. But then that resistance starts creeping up within us. Well, I might have to put this project to hold if I do that. Or that may bring my margins down a little too far and I'm not real comfortable with that. See, with us, we have a tendency to be our own worst enemy and resist. See, we often pull back from loving generously because of inertia or routines or fear of the unknown. And face it, we like to live comfortably and we like to be surrounded by the familiar. But we're also afraid of what people might think. And this is where the second part of the resistance comes in. See, sometimes it starts with us, but sometimes that resistance comes from other people. And I can think of a good instance of when this occurred. There was a guy not too long ago who went to a football game in Iowa. And he brought along one of those signs with him. And the sign got caught on camera. And the sign said, "Send me money for beer." And it had his Venmo account on it. Now, if you're not familiar with Venmo, basically it's a way to send money back and forth between people digitally. And surprise, surprise, people start sending this guy money. In fact, they start sending him a lot of money. And more people started sending him money. And more people started sending him money. Soon, he had $1 million in his account. I mean, that's incredible. $1 million. And he's sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, what just happened? This is crazy. And he recognized, hey, something's going on here that's beyond me. Something's going on that's way out of bounds. I'm not used to seeing anything like this. So he decides, I can't just keep this. He donates all $1 million to a hospital. And he even gets another organization to donate $1 million to this hospital on top of that. Now, that's incredible. That's an objectively great thing. I mean, think about it. He didn't have to give any of that money up. In fact, he couldn't even say that he scammed people because he told them right up front on the sign what he wanted the money for. But he did. He donated it to a hospital. Now you would think, who could object to this? This is an objectively good thing to do. But there was a reporter who decided they were going to dig into this guy's background. And they found some inappropriate social media posts from when he was a sophomore in high school. And they started publishing these posts, trying to ruin this guy's life. He donates $1 million for the hospital. And now he's got people out trying to ruin his life. Or maybe you've experienced resistance that comes because you have family members who maybe don't follow Jesus. And when you are making decisions and really trying to lean into what Jesus is telling you and they don't understand it, sometimes that can encounter resistance. Maybe you've experienced that. I also think about some relatives of mine. See, they adopted 7 kids out of the foster care system. That's an incredibly loving and generous thing to do. And I think that's an objectively great thing. I mean, taking these kids out of rough situations and giving them a loving, stable home. It's an incredible act of generosity. Who could have a problem with that? But some people had a problem with who they adopted. And they faced pushback. And they had people tell them, who are you to adopt and raise kids who are of a different race? And I think about that and it just kind of makes me angry. And then it reminds me of this quote from the movie The Dark Knight, where Alfred is talking to Batman about the Joker. And he says, you know, some people just want to watch the world burn. And that's what I think about. Sometimes you do everything you can to be loving and generous, and people still want to burn it down. See, when we love generously like Jesus did, we have to conclude that people will have a similar reaction to us that they had to Jesus. We have to understand that. And Jesus tells us basically the exact same thing. He says in John 15, verses 18 and 19, he says this, if the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world. But I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. See, everything about the world will attempt to force us away from loving generously and to force us into pulling back. And if we think that we will be rewarded for doing the good things that we're thinking about, we can think again. It's just not going to happen. See, when we encounter this kind of resistance, we have a choice to make. Most of us really don't like standing out. We don't like facing resistance. We don't like being the center of attention or center of controversy. And so we're tempted to pull back when we face resistance. I remember another story. When we had youth in our youth group, we would sometimes encounter resistance from sports coaches because the sports coaches wanted that sport to be the number one thing in that kid's life. And so we would go to plan mission trips and we'd have kids who want to go on the trips, but some of their coaches were at times almost even threatening their role on the team if they left to go with us. And in those moments, we have choices to make. Are we willing to wade into the tension of helping people even when it's messy? Are we willing to go there? See, there's a cost associated with loving generously. Think about the guy with the beer sign. I mean, his life would have been easier had he not donated that money. It's true, it would have been. Foster care takes so much time, energy, finances, and it's such a long commitment, especially if you adopt. And it puts you in so many interesting situations that are tough. And if you've ever tried to help somebody, you stepped into love generously, you know there's a chance you're going to be taken advantage of. And some of you have been. And so hard sometimes to take that and continue to love generously in those moments. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what kind of life do you want to live? See, a life where we love generously is messy. It's uncomfortable. It's hard. And it's costly. But what if we don't? What does our life look like then? See, it's completely expected. We're never pushed to be uncomfortable. We never have to step out in faith. We never have to care about others. And what happens? Nothing. It's mediocre. But we are not called by Jesus and saved by his death upon the cross in order to leave mediocre and self-indulgent lives. We're not called to do that. But we get something great in return if we're willing to love generously. We get a life of adventure. We get a life of deep meaning. And we see God work in us and through us. See, when we invite people of all kinds to the banquet table, when we include not only those who can serve us, but whose needs we can serve, when we tear down the walls that divide us into our warring tribes, then we can find true community. Community that's rooted in our common humanity and our shared need for God. So think about it. This week, I want you to think about this. What resistance are you encountering, or might you encounter, that could prevent you from loving generously? What is it in your life? I want you to think about that. And if it's something you can control, I want you to work on that. If not, think about how you'll handle it, how you'll step in those moments. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we come to you today, and we thank you for your example. We thank you for this challenge of what it means to love generously. God, help us walk into this process of learning how to love generously with our eyes open, understanding that when we do this, we will meet resistance. God, help us to take that resistance that comes from within us and deal with it, and understand that you want us to move beyond our comfort zones into these spaces. And God, as we encounter resistance from the outside, God, help us to learn how to respond to that in loving strength. That we can stand our ground and love people even when there are consequences. So help us this week, God. Help us to find an opportunity to love someone generously, to extend our table, to bring more people into our relational circle. Who will you reach out to today? God, help us find that person. In your name, amen.